I'm going to walk through some excellent product marketing case studies from the book Growth IQ. One thing that I really love about this book is the emphasis on the target market being much more than just the target customers. There's a lot of talk about how to leverage partnerships as the key growth opportunity, looking at things like trends in the market, rather than just getting hyper focused on narrow targeting, which is what a lot of marketing thought leaders do. Now, there are some things that I disagree with here. There's a little too much emphasis, in my opinion, on trying to drive growth through things like loyalty, which I believe are largely out of your control. But let's move forward with some of the key, most exciting lessons from the book. First case study is Under Armour, and we have a quote here from their CEO. Great entrepreneurs take one product and become great at one thing. I would say the number one key to Under Armour marketing to any company's success, plain and simple, is focus. Now, the author of another book called Competition Demystified from Columbia Business School is Bruce Greenwald. Now, this is the guy who's really looking at fundamentally what makes companies successful, why Warren Buffett is so successful by finding excellent companies. And with large companies, a lot of it has to do with economies of scale or something like customer captivity or government protection. But when you're dealing with small startups, when I wrote him, he's telling me that largely these small companies don't have any sustainable competitive advantage. So what they need to focus on is being efficient. And the only real way that a small company or a micro company can be efficient to operate efficiently is by focusing, by having some sort of narrow scope. And so the lesson here from Under Armour is to really narrow your scope and nail one product. And this is what a lot of successful people are going to tell you in the entrepreneur space. So we look at one product that Under Armour released, which is basically t-shirts. You had one market, football, and one target customer, athletes. Now note the distinction here between the market and the target customer. These are not the same thing, even though a lot of marketers are going to tell you that. So they're operating in football and they're targeting the athletes. So the high end users who are going to need high performance t-shirts. Now, another key to success, other than just focus for Under Armour, was partnering with retailers. So often, because people think the target market is the target customer, they naturally go the strategy where they're trying to sell directly to customers. But that's not really what Under Armour is doing here. Is they're maintaining relationships with retailers who are then selling to the end users, the end buyers. Now, let's look at another company called Sephora. Now, I know some people that worked at the headquarters of Sephora on the cutting edge of e-commerce. And if we look at what Sephora's success was, it really wasn't about what it sold. It's not selling anything new. Cosmetics have been around for a long time, but really the change is in how it's sold. So a lot of companies, particularly startups, are going to focus on trying to do something new and exciting, or even in large companies when you're trying to do something innovative. Let's come up with something completely different, and all too often it just fails. So, for example, let's say you're an Amazon seller, you decide to sell this unique product. Well, there's actually no demand for that product because it's unique. Nobody's heard of it. There's no demand for it. So a lot of the success may be not coming from creating something new, but just finding innovative ways of selling something old. So what did Sephora did? They organized their stores by product instead of by brand, which perhaps is what customers value more. They put an emphasis on e-commerce, which not a lot of cosmetic companies were doing. They focused on their mobile app. They had a mobile point of sale where people are able to purchase through phones, and they sold through Amazon, even though Amazon is maybe considered a competitor of a retailer. That still is a growth opportunity. And if you really want to go big, sometimes that means you need to partner with competitors, which is something we're going to talk about later. Another key to success is not just looking at the partners in your target market, but also looking at the trends. So, for example, the Honest Company is looking at this trend for chemical free products. And this is how they're able to piggyback and skyrocket their own company based on trends in the market. Red Bull is a really fascinating product marketing case study because they approach marketing in ways that a lot of companies don't, and in a lot of ways that companies don't consider. So let's look at their early success in Thailand. What they did was they sponsored boxing matches and sports events to elevate awareness for the product. Now, how many startups think about doing that? They don't. They might think about running Google PPC ads, doing SEO, but sponsoring a boxing match, not the creative approach that most companies are going to take. They're going to go head on with competitors and bid for PPC clicks, for example. The other thing they did is they created a new category. So it wasn't just selling soda, it was something completely different. You're selling something that's not coffee, that's not really soda, but is sort of this in between. It's an energy drink. And a lot of the success was really piggybacking off events and teams. So I see it as somewhat of a PR approach. So whenever you have a sports team or an event, there's going to be a lot of journalism around that. There's going to be a lot of radio talking about it, a lot of word of mouth around it. So if you're able to piggyback off of that without paying directly for that publicity, then you're going to get a lot more awareness than you may be directly paying for. The other thing that they did is they went up against big competitors like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, but they didn't compete with them head on their core products. They were on the edges of the product categories, which is where Coke and Pepsi are going to basically ignore them. They're able to grow substantially without initially getting noticed by the big players. All right, so four big things that they did. They did unconventional marketing, largely centered around things like extreme sports. They focused on strategic partnerships, and later we're going to demonstrate how GoPro fits into that. They had a very simple product lineup, which again, we saw earlier, where when you're a startup, you need to really focus. Sometimes that means just one product, or in the case of Red Bull, maybe a handful of different product variants, maybe a sugar-free version and a full sugar version. And having a distinctive brand is completely important. This is something we see a lot of the research on branding show is that a lot of companies, when they do branding, they think we need to go with certain colors. Red represents food, so we need to be red. But then what ends up happening is you just look like all your competitors. So the distinction is lost, and a lot of your marketing goes to waste because people actually associate your advertising, your marketing with competitors, particularly your larger competitors. But if you're very iconic, if you're very distinctive, and distinctiveness is achieved most strongly empirically by using something like a mascot or a bull in this case, you're going to be much more memorable. Now, in terms of the go-to-market, what are they doing? Well, they're attending college parties, they're going to libraries, coffee shops, bars, extreme sporting events. They sponsored Formula One racing events. And one of the most interesting things they did was they bought a Formula One racing team, which is, to me, an extremely creative PR advantage that they achieved. And if you look at my lectures on PR, one of the things that I talk about is that PR is not about substance, it's about performance. So why would an energy drink company need to own a racing team? It's a sports category. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense from a logical perspective unless you look at it in terms of the ROI from PR and publicity. Because if you are a beverage company that owns a racing team, that has significant value in terms of PR, story writing, in terms of getting attention from journalists. So what else did they do to try to amplify this PR edge? Well, they sponsored snowboarding events, cliff diving, dirt bike racing. And what they didn't do is they didn't spend millions on one-to-one acquisition campaigns, which again is kind of the default that a lot of companies, particularly startups, go with is they think, okay, this is our target customer. We need to go after our target customer instead of thinking of more indirect routes. How do we reach the target customer through publicity? How do we reach the target customer through sponsorships? How do we reach the target customer in more creative ways that have higher ROI in terms of customer acquisition? One key to success is to consider partnering with a competitor. If you really want to achieve ambitious growth, sometimes that means doing things that seem counterintuitive. So, for example, partnering with a competitor on things like product development or intellectual property sharing, these types of things will help spread the burden, and ultimately, you're both going to be more successful. So, some specific examples here. Sears, which is a retailer, partnered with Amazon to sell their appliances, their Kenmore appliances. And Sears is able to achieve much more reach than they otherwise could if they just relied on their own retail stores. Another example, in the software SaaS industry, Jason Lemkin talks about how you should consider integrating and partnering with your competitors to achieve significant growth. If you are not partnering, you are missing key opportunities to expand the brand. This comes from the president of Cinnabon. So you can see here that you're basically leaving money on the table if you're not looking for partners. And you see this with a lot of large companies where they're doing things like brand collaborations and partnerships to uh, help achieve massive reach and help with distribution, help with product development. You see this in the entertainment industry all the time where musicians will partner up to make their events much bigger, to make their hits much larger. Another thing that we see with companies is you need to consider switching sometimes completely from direct sales to customers, or D2C as they call it, direct to consumer, and perhaps focus strategically completely on partnerships and things like value-added resellers. This might be more efficient. This may allow you to focus more on product development rather than on direct sales and customer support, that type of thing. You can't grow internally or through acquisitions fast enough to dominate a major technology revolution by yourself. So that's why collaborating with other people is how you achieve great things. That's how politics works. That's how corporations work. Basically, anything that's big requires some sort of collaboration with other people. So partnerships are going to be critical. In the case of Cisco, they attribute more than 90% of their revenue to partnerships, and those partnerships include resellers, system integrators, and telephone companies. Another key lesson from this book that really stood out to me uh, by looking at some of my successes and failures and looking at entrepreneurs succeeding and failing is this. If a company does decide to enter a new market, it is much easier to choose a target where customers already spend money buying more or less the same kind of product that a given company is selling. So basically, this quote is saying go where people are buying something the same or similar to what you're already selling. Getting a prospective customer to buy something familiar is much less risky. So this goes against the grain of a lot of marketing advice that's out there that says, no, you need to pick a hyper niche market with something, offer something completely unique, talk about your point of difference and how much different you are. Uh, but the reality of the market is almost the complete opposite of that. Really, what you want to do is give people what they want. There's a millionaire entrepreneur that I worked with on his book, and he was saying the phrase he used was "go where the fish are biting." And you're much more likely to be successful here. Now, I'm not saying you can't be successful with completely unique products, but you're fighting an uphill battle. You really have to educate the customer when you're creating a new category. And a perfect example of this is selling on Amazon. Look at what people are already buying, look at the products that already have tons of reviews, and either offer something, another variant, another branded variant of what's already successful, or improve upon what's already selling. And that's going to be a much more easier path to success for you. Now, this is from Spotify. The smarter you are higher up in the funnel, the stronger you will be lower down in driving engagement, retention, and ultimately lifetime value. This comes from the global VP for Spotify. So, this is where I'm spending most of my time when I think about marketing strategy is really the top of the funnel, because if I'm not reaching enough people and if I'm not reaching the right people, then that's really the biggest bottleneck in terms of my success in selling a product. Because if I only reach 20 people, then the maximum number of customers I could have, if you ignore word of mouth, is going to be 20 people. But if I'm able to reach 10,000 prospective buyers, then at least the ceiling has been raised in terms of how many people I can reach. Now, that doesn't mean I need to go wasted on just generating reach anywhere or generating impressions that have no value, but it means I need to do a little bit of testing to try to reach uh, perhaps as many category buyers as possible. And that's really where the emphasis should be. But I see in the marketing world a little too much emphasis on how do I narrow it down to the very precise retargeting group that I can. And you end up overpaying because CPMs are really high with retargeting groups. Narrow targeting often fails. It can succeed if you only need a few contracts and you just send out a couple direct mail boxes to some directors in Fortune 500 companies, and that's great. But if you're in any way mass market or selling a product that isn't say $50,000, then you're probably going to want to think about casting a wide net, and that's what Spotify does. And they're able to cast a very wide net, in fact, because they have a 27% conversion rate from free to paid users, which is incredible. And being efficient at the top of the funnel is critical to their success. One of the key lessons we have from Netflix is that you need to look for cheaper ways to acquire customers. The low hanging fruit when you're first starting out might involve things like PPC ads, where you're able to profitably acquire customers, let's say for $500, and you're able to sell them for $1,000 in annual recurring revenue. And that's great, but that's going to saturate at some point. Either you're just going to scoop up all the cheap to acquire customers, or new competitors are going to enter. Your market's going to mature, and you really just can't focus on that linear one-to-one customer acquisition. And what we see in Netflix's case is they were paying $45 to acquire U.S. customers in 2013, and eventually that became the cost to acquire international customers, which are cheaper to acquire. The market's less competitive. And from 2016 to 17, their customer acquisition costs more than doubled. So when you're focusing on linear acquisition channels like PPC, it may not be sustainable. Ultimately, when any company grows, you're really going to need to switch to brand marketing or PR, because that's how you reach a lot of people efficiently. And it doesn't mean that you're measuring customer acquisition on a case by case basis. It's more, let's allocate, say, 10% of sales to marketing, and the most efficient way to allocate it in terms of reach is going to be things like the television, YouTube video awareness ads, those sorts of things. Now let's look at McDonald's. So McDonald's had an interesting case where they expanded their menu, thinking, okay, well, we're going to give customers more variety, and it ended up backfiring. The customers became overwhelmed with choices. It ended up slowing down the process of buying. But if you go into McDonald's today, you realize their menu is actually incredibly streamlined. It's very simple. There aren't a lot of variations that you can buy, at least not relative to what they used to have. But one of the key innovations they did was they launched all day breakfast. So, all day breakfast is not introducing a new product. And this is something that we saw earlier in this lecture, is that innovation is not always coming up with something new. It's more about just finding new ways of distributing what's already there. And that's what we saw with Sephora. So we have a quote here from the CEO and president of McDonald's. Says, whatever progress McDonald's might make in the future was the result of decisions being made today. McDonald's president and CEO Steve Easterbrook conceded that 1 or 2 quarters of growth didn't translate into a successful turnaround. Another case study related to one we talked about earlier is GoPro. Now, I used to be a shareholder in GoPro, and I also know somebody that works in GoPro at GoPro headquarters. And what GoPro did was they partnered with Best Buy. But the really interesting thing here is they didn't partner with Best Buy when they became a big player. They became a partner when they only had 10 people. Now, how many startups out there think about doing that? No, most startups do is they think, okay, well, let's set up e-commerce, or let's sell through Amazon. Let's run some PPC ads to our Shopify. But GoPro, no, they went after the big fish, and they were very successful. Now, they used to be selling on the home shopping network, but obviously they're going to have much bigger reach by going through a channel like Best Buy. The other thing they did was they partner with an unconventional partner, which is Red Bull. So they collaborated with Red Bull on content production, distribution, cross promotions, product innovation. And why that partnership makes sense is because Red Bull's also focused on people that are doing things like extreme sports, which is where a GoPro is more useful than something like an iPhone when you're doing something like surfing or something dangerous and you need a protected camera to videotape the experience. Okay, so again, around this theme of it's not necessarily about creating new innovative things, it's about new ways of selling. So Salesforce, arguably the most successful SaaS company, perhaps the first big SaaS company, came up with CRM, which is not really something new, but what was really new was selling it as a subscription, as a software as a service, and that was ultimately where their success was. So that's what you need to think about in terms of innovation, is perhaps our pricing method needs to change, our business model needs to change, not necessarily our product offering or feature offering. Another key to success often is to think long term. Unilever did this because they stopped quarterly financial reporting to help align the company for long-term success. And that's really where I'm focused right now. Is I'm less interested in things like lead generation, how do I generate immediate sales, and more, how do I generate awareness with as many people as possible today, so that ultimately they end up buying a year from today, because people aren't immediately influenced and pushed to buy things in most cases instantaneously. And if you're hyper focused on the short term, you're really going to cannibalize yourself. You're going to stop investing in anything, essentially. You could start selling off your assets to temporarily boost your profits, but ultimately you're going to erode your company because you don't have a long term focus. And lastly, we have Tom's shoes. And the lesson here is really to attach a story to your product. And really, what this is about is PR juice, is getting more reach and amplification of your marketing message than you otherwise would if you were just doing direct advertising, particularly linear advertising like PPC ads. So, what's the PR juice in their case? Well, they're giving away shoes. You buy a pair of shoes and they give away shoes to somebody that perhaps can't afford them. That has tremendous word of mouth appeal. Positive messages like that can certainly go viral. We also see with Tom's bags, what they're doing is they're creating a whole story around supplying funds to train midwives. So if you can attach some sort of story to your product like that, even if it's just in terms of a story in a video ad and perhaps isn't integral to your product offering, it can still go a long way.